I'll hit record. Awesome. So hello, everyone. My name is Grace, and I'm one of the co-founders of Product Buds, which is one of the fastest growing communities for aspiring product managers. We are all in this community on a journey to sprout, grow, and flourish our product management careers, whether that be participating in the Project Jam within the Product Buds community or in our book club, or even within mock interviews, resume reviews, participating in the job board, and networking with others in the community. We are all so excited to see how much we have grown in such a short time. If any of you have checked Slack, we're at over 2,000 members. So this is absolutely wonderful to see. And we're very excited to see you all, 120 of you at today's event. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Darsh, who will introduce our wonderful speaker, Diego.
Thank you, Grace. So everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from. And I hope you had a great weekend and have a great week ahead. So just a few things for today. First of all, our speaker today is Diego Granados, who is a product manager at Microsoft working on artificial intelligence and machine learning products. Diego did his bachelor's in electrical engineering and worked as a business intelligence consultant before attending Duke University to study his MBA. And if like an undergrad and MBA wasn't enough, Diego is also pursuing his online Masters of Science in Computer Science at my alma mater, Georgia Tech. So all yellow jackets and people from Atlanta hype up in the chat. And post-grad, he also joined Cisco as a product manager working on IoT, web, and mobile apps before he decided to join Microsoft. So we have an amazing speaker with us today, and how the event is going to go today is like a lot of us are facing these problems that what exactly do we do in a PM interview? And if you haven't had any PM interview right now, you might be also curious like what kind of questions are asked. So what we are going to do today is I'm going to role play the role of an interviewer, and Diego is going to role play as an interviewee. And what we are going to do is we are going to ask Diego a product sense question, and Diego is going to explain his thought process and how he goes about solving the such PM questions. And just few house rules. We'll be taking all the questions through Slido. One of my team members would keep sharing the link in the chat. So feel free to go there and type down your questions for Diego. And if you have any questions specific to Microsoft or recruiting as a PM for Microsoft, please hold it off till the end. We want to make it most productive for everybody attending. So we'll be taking up questions related to product sense or interviewing, whatever, first, and then we'll join for Microsoft questions. So without further ado, I'm handing it off to Diego. Take it away.
Thank you so much, guys. And thanks everyone for attending this Sunday. Let me start sharing my screen here. All right, hopefully you guys can see the PowerPoint, and let me just make one more adjustment. All right, quick question. Can you guys see which slide?
If we can see the first slide.
All right, perfect. Just a moment.
I think you're sharing the presenter's view though.
That's what I was afraid. All right, 1 second. Sorry about that. Technical challenges. So if I do this, you guys should be able to see the full first screen.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, perfect. All right, awesome. So while we do this transition, so this QR code is just for the slide.do, so feel free to ask any questions. Like Darsh was saying, so the goal today is to show you guys a little bit of what's the thought process behind answering the question, and try to answer the question and try to mimic as much as possible some real scenario, meaning I won't be just storming through the answer. I'll try to do it as if I were actually doing an interview. Just to keep the flow of the answer and the whole process from beginning to end, please hold your questions at the end. Don't think that we are just ignoring you. It's more about making sure that you guys see how the flow is going. So just a quick intro from my side. So I'm originally from Mexico. That's where I was born and raised. Like Darsh mentioned, I studied electric engineering, but I really always had that passion to not just look at the data or just look at the circuits, but I also wanted to work with customers. So I decided to join a business intelligence consulting firm. And it was really exciting. I was able to look at data, customer problems, but I knew that something was missing. That part that was missing is essentially, once I have the data and I can make a decision, I wanted to make that decision. And that prompted me to come to the US to study my MBA at Duke. I wanted to actually start doing, making those decisions. And this is when I learned about product management. The reason why I highlight that is because getting into product management is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not a one-day thing. It's something that will take time. So whether you do it today, tomorrow, or during your MBA or post your MBA, if you decide to do that, then just don't lose hope. It's a marathon, not a sprint. After the MBA, joined Cisco, worked in IoT, and decided after almost 2 years that it was time for a change. And so I decided to recruit again, join Microsoft, and super excited to be working in some AI and machine learning stuff. I will answer any questions about Microsoft near the end. And yeah, welcome to this interview session. All right, happy to start the prompt.
Thanks for the introduction, Diego. And again, to reiterate, like we do in our every event, please take notes. I can't stress enough how useful it has been for me personally and for my teammates. And I would highly encourage all of you to take notes. Maybe if you like something on the screen, take screenshots and store it and just use it as a study material, because at the end of the day, all of us want to learn better. So without further ado, we will start a prompt today. So Diego, our prompt today is, how would you design an oven for wheelchair users?
All right. So I got the question. I understand that this is about designing a specific user for a specific set of users, right? Now, the biggest mistake that a lot of candidates do here is they immediately start jumping into answering the question or into saying the first thing that comes to mind. This is a moment for you to do two things. First, breathe. And then second, take notes. I have an iPad here. It's simulating as if I were taking notes. My recommendation is use a piece of paper and something where you can write. It's very okay to take time, right? So this is about understanding the prompt and understanding how to answer it. Don't rush into the answer. So the first thing that I would say to my interviewer would be, okay, I understand the prompt. Now, let me ask you a few questions. If, for example, Darsh was part of Microsoft, I would ask something like, I have a question for you. Is it safe to assume that we are Microsoft or Google or whatever company you're interviewing with, or can I assume that we are a startup?
So for this case, you can assume that we are a startup that specializes in cloud data and AI, and we are not like a big tech representing Google, Microsoft, Amazon, or something like that.
Okay, now that I know that we are a startup, the next thing that I would ask my interviewer is about constraints. Because as a startup, I can be thinking that there might be some constraints, or it might be that there are no constraints. So the next thing that I'll ask my interviewer is, okay, given that we are a startup, what kind of constraints when it comes to time and resources do we have?
So for this case, we just got a substantial amount of funding for this project. It's the first in its class, so think that there are no constraints for this exercise.
Interesting. So if that's the case, does it mean that this is the first oven that we design? In other words, since we're a startup, I believe that our goal should be to enter the market, to get more user adoption. And that's what I'm thinking as the goal for this prompt. Do you have another goal in mind, or is it okay if we pursue this one?
So for this one, yes, this is the first of its class, and we want to see adoption in the market, whether some product like this is something that people will adopt in their use.
Okay. In a real interview, you may be asking more questions. Today, for the sake of time, I'll move forward with the prompt, but make sure that you ask enough clarifying questions so that you not only understand what's the goal, but also the boundaries around the goal. So now that I understand more about the goal, the next thing that I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about the market, or in other words, I'll talk about, for example, the competitors. In this framework that I'll show you here, this is one framework that a group of friends and myself, like we came up with this, but you can use any framework that is out there, right? There's no one size fits all. It's more about what are you comfortable with. So today I'm going to show you just one of the frameworks. If I were talking about a favorite product, I could explain why is it my favorite product, what advantages it has. But in this case, I know the type of product. So I'll talk a little bit about the competition and make sure that you also add a few, maybe personal experience with it. And this is just to build empathy. Remember that in this case, my interviewer, Darsh, I'm trying to build that rapport. I'm trying to make it a dialogue, not so much as me just spitting out answers. Okay, so now that I understand more about the goals, and I think that, most of the people, I have an oven. And when I imagine that if I were to buy one, because in my case, my apartment came with an oven, but if I were to buy one, there are a couple of factors that I would consider, like, for example, what kind of space will it occupy? Do I have enough space in my kitchen? Is it gas? Is it electric? Or what type of technology? Like maybe, I'm a tech aficionado, so I really love to have a ton of buttons and alarms and things that can make my life easier with the oven. And I'm sure there are plenty of brands out there to buy an oven, but this is honestly the first time that I hear about designing something specific for someone who is in a wheelchair. So while there may be competitors for ovens, I would say that this is the first in class. So we really don't have a competitor for this particular segment. Now, Darsh, the next thing that I want to talk is a little bit about the users. And I believe that even though we understand who we're designing for, there might be other users there. So with that last phrase, I just told my interviewer what's my next step. So without having to sound like I am purposefully going step A, step B, step C in a framework, I am guiding my interviewer through the framework, right? And it was just a simple phrase. The next thing that I'll do is talk about my users. So here's my personal recommendation. Pick 3, 4, 2, 5, pick a number and stick to that number of how many users you're going to say. You may be thinking of 20 users, but just stick to 3. And I'll show you how we're making progress and how to narrow things down from 3 to just one of the segments, okay? So Darsh, let me take a moment here to just write a few notes on my paper here, just to think of brainstorm of some users. What I just did there, again, many candidates just jump into brainstorming users and they end up spitting out like 20,000 users, and it just becomes very confusing for the interviewer. It is very okay to take a few minutes and write some notes and then come up with an answer. If you feel that you've been silent for too long, probably you've been silent for too long. So at that moment, just, start saying something like, okay, I have a few things down, like for example, and start listing your users. So I decided to take a moment to take my notes. I write my notes down. And once I'm comfortable, I would continue the conversation. All right. So Darsh, I've thought about some different users that we can talk about as we think of the general users in a wheelchair. So the first segment that I can think of is, young business people who may be going in and out to work. So they might have some time to cook in the mornings and in the afternoons, or maybe even in the weekends. Another segment that I have here is thinking about parents. So there may be either parents who go to work, or they could even be stay-at-home parents, but they have to cook for their entire family, right? Mm-hmm. And the other segment that I can think of are actually kids and teenagers that, want to learn how to cook. I remember when I was a kid, I always wanted to learn how to cook. So I would approach my parents or my grandparents to learn from them. So I would try to be using the oven since I was young. Now, we also talked about different segments within people who are using wheelchairs, but there might be other users like their friends, their family who may not be in a wheelchair. So we need to keep them in mind as we design through this. Mm-hmm. The last thing that I want to mention, Darsh, is that from these 3 groups of users, thinking of our goal of getting into the market and trying to get the majority of the users to adopt our design, I'm thinking that parents should be an interesting segment to go after. They might be the ones who have the most time or even the most experience in cooking. Business professionals may be too much in a rush, and kids, while they may be, able to use the oven, it's really parents who might be teaching them. And so I believe parents we should go after those. Now, that's what I'm thinking, but what are your thoughts on that? Should we explore another segment, or is it okay if we go after parents who are, wheelchair users?
Mm-hmm. So I like the reasoning that you went forward with explaining the segments. For this scenario, I think parents who are wheelchair users sounds like a good plan. But I would like to pause for a minute here for our audience. A lot of you joined after the interview started. So just for some context, we are having a mock interview with Diego, and our prompt is, how would you design an oven for wheelchair users? Till now, Diego has kind of explained how you ask clarifying questions, what kind of things you should think about, maybe competitors, and then how you approach and suggesting different user segments. So I hope everybody is taking notes, but going forward, my response is that parents who are wheelchair users sounds like a good plan.
All right, that's great. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the gaps for this particular segment of users. Okay, once again, I told my interviewer, what's the next step or what's the next thing that I'm going to do? And in here, when I think of the pain points, again, my recommendation, think of a rule of 3 or 4 or 5, whatever number, and stick to those. It's way easier. One thing that I want to clarify is if you look back at the segments that I mentioned, I didn't go into ages between this and that, or male versus female. I try to capture a broader segment that yet, at least in your mind, is going to put the demographics in there. And the reason for that is that it just becomes too hard for you as the interviewee to keep track of all the details, like the age, the genders, and you can get into a never-ending story of the interviewer ask you questions and questioning you why you picked that segment, why did you pick that segment. But if I say parents, it's a little bit easier for me to imagine my own parents. If they were in a wheelchair, what can I think of? So just a note there, personal preference, instead of saying age ranges and demographics, just stick to who they are if they were a persona. Okay, so once I say, the next thing I'm going to do is just think about the use cases. I'm going to go again with, all right, Darsh, before I tell you the use cases, let me take a minute here to brainstorm some ideas. And take a minute and brainstorm some ideas and write them down in the piece of paper. Again, if you're silent for too long, it's time to start talking. So, all right, Darsh, I had a few ideas here of what are some of the main pain points for this particular segment of users, parents who are using a wheelchair. So when I think of a wheelchair and an oven and it's placed in the kitchen, actually, if I just look at my kitchen, the first thing that comes to mind is the space, right? There's not a lot of space when I open the oven. And so right now, if I open the oven, moving from one side to the other of the door, it's just complicated. I cannot even imagine that problem when you are in a wheelchair. The second pain point has to do with how the door opens, but also how we operate the oven, right? The movement of the oven, of the door of the oven, it's sort of like you have to pull it. But if I can't, in a wheelchair, stand in front of the oven, it's just really hard for me to imagine how you pull that. And at the same time, the buttons to operate the oven are typically on the top side. So if you're sitting down in a wheelchair, it can be really hard to reach out for those controls. And the last pain point is about safety. As I am thinking of the other pain points and how we could make it easier, if I'm a parent in a wheelchair and I have kids and I just make it way easier for them to operate the oven, there could be a risk there. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. I'm going to make a small parenthesis here. When you think of parents, you have to think of kids. Whatever you're designing for the parents is going to affect kids. That's just a tip, that your segment can involve other segments that you always have to keep in mind. And if you think of kids, you should immediately think safety. And if you design something for kids, your user is the kid, but the customer is the parent. So you have to make those type of relationships as you're going through this segment. All right, Darsh. So here, those are some of the pain points that I can think of. Before I move on to the solution, is there anything else that you'd like to explore, or do you think that with these pain points should be enough?
I think your mindset on relating with users and customers, I really like that, because as you mentioned, users and customers can be two different things, but at the end you are aiming for customers. And for the pain points that you mentioned, I think these pain points are okay to go ahead with. I'm kind of curious, like, are you going to prioritize one pain point over another, or you're going for the whole? And just for the sake of it, I think, Diego, you can shift to the slide where you show the framework you're following. Uh, I think you were going to share it.
Oh my God, it's not sharing.
No, I think I just noticed it's on the first slide. That's why.
I am so sorry. I don't know what's going on. 1 second. I apologize. Can you guys see it now?
Yep.
I am so sorry, guys, for that. So I apologize.
If you could go quickly through the process that you just taken.
Yes. So we went from the goal, clarifying questions. Once we understood the problem and the constraints, we went into talking about what are the competitors and the existing solutions, right? And if this were a prompt like, what is your favorite product? Then you also talk about why is it your favorite product versus other solutions out there. Once you talk about the competitors or the market, and you talk or you prompt your interviewer to say, I'm going to go into the user segments, is my goal and my assumptions correct? You start listing something like 3 segments or 5 users, whatever number you can think of. Once you think of your users and pick one and confirm with your interviewer that it's okay to go after that segment, you go into the use cases. And as the use cases, like we just saw, we talk about 3 different types of pain points. And the next thing, and hopefully you guys can see the features here. Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. The next thing that I'm going to do is, so Darsh mentioned, as my interviewer, he said, let's prioritize. And the prioritization is also going to be hand in hand with the solutions. If you're interviewing with a company like Google, it is well known that, hey, have a moonshot idea. My recommendation is always have a moonshot idea. It's that one thing that is going to tell your interviewer, hey, I can think big. Like, this is not about just adding one button or changing the color. Here's how we can radically change something. That being said, have one idea, not 3 out of 3 moonshot ideas, because then you also have to be grounded at some point. So use the grounded part to say, I can think of short term, I can think of the constraints, but I can also think big. It's my personal recommendation.
Diego, could you elaborate on what a moonshot idea is for our attendees today?
Yes. So a moonshot idea is something that it could be incredibly crazy, but that solves the customer problem. I'm going to give you an example, not related to this one, and then I'll answer this prompt of the wheelchair with a moonshot idea. But once I was asked in an interview, hey, I don't have enough time to read. How can I read, in my sleep? I would love to read. And my answer was, the moonshot idea was, well, let's have some contact lenses that as you are sleeping during the day, right before you go to sleep, you just pass the notebook or the book or whatever you're reading super quick. The contact lenses absorb everything, and when you're sleeping, they translate that into a dream. It's a wild and crazy idea, right? And that was my moonshot idea. And then I said, okay, here are the constraints. And then I started going into, we would have to develop some crazy technology like this, some crazy technology like that. We would need to invest in research and development, like start breaking that moonshot idea. You don't have to go that crazy, but it's okay. As long as you understand that it's solving the customer problem, it's okay. Your other 2 ideas can be more grounded, if that makes sense.
Yep, that does make sense. And it also gives you, the interviewer, an idea that you have the capability to imagine bold ideas. It's not necessary that they go for it, but it just allows you to showcase your ability that even though it's a crazy idea, you can think on that level, that how can you possibly implement a crazy idea? Right. So moving forward, let's go ahead with the pain points we have. I just like to know, if we had to prioritize, how would you prioritize these pain points?
Right. So everything around priority goes back to the goal. What was our goal? Our goal is to get user adoption and enter into the market. Let's very briefly think of the pain points. I talked about the space. I talked about having the buttons or the controls on the top. And I also talked about safety. I can immediately tell you that safety is my number 3 priority. Why? Because in the end, if we don't design something that really solves the customer problems, which is around space, we're not going to get that user adoption. So safety is a very, very nice added feature, right? So then my priority is within the other 2. Now, within the other 2, they are very similar in this case. They're not the same, but they're very similar. So I can either design an oven that maybe it's smaller so that it solves the pain point of the space, or I can redesign how we open the door and the buttons. Either of those, and then we can go into technology, feasibility, how fast we want to develop it, and I'll show you some things that I have as an answer. But that's one way that you can brainstorm how to prioritize it. Think of what is your objective, and start discarding things that don't maximize that objective, which in our case is solving the customer problem. In other words, trying to get that adoption and solving that it's just hard for somebody in a wheelchair to use an oven, if I think of my own kitchen.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Sounds good. So for the sake of this discussion, let's say I'd like to hear like how you prioritize, but for the sake of this discussion, we are going to go forward with all these 3 pain points.
All right, perfect. So now that we have the pain points, and I had a minute to brainstorm some ideas, thinking as a product manager, putting my hat as a PM on, here are a few ideas that I have. The first idea is that what if we make the oven very easy to open? So for example, we have a button, you can press it. There's the challenge though, that the kids may just be able to press it and open it. But what if we actually add things like the oven can only be opened through fingerprint scanning? So you as a parent, put your fingerprint and only that opens the oven. An alternative solution could be that if we incorporate Bluetooth, then only if the parent's phone is really nearby, the oven is gonna release maybe the hatch to open. Otherwise, it would just never open. So that's one solution that I can think of for tackling the safety feature. Or a little bit of the safety and easy to open. The second thing that I can think of is, what if we just, redesign how the oven opens completely? What if instead of trying to pull the oven so that it opens, what if we just make it slide or push a button and then it will automatically just slide down so that then there's no need for space to open the oven. The oven can be where it is and it would immediately open and close with a push of the button. So that will be about redesigning the door and its mechanics to open. And since we are already redesigning the door, we can actually make the buttons something like, if it was an LED screen, touch screen, I can actually have all the controls for the oven right on the front of the door. So passing the buttons from the top to all the way to the door itself. So I can think of those, 2 ways to solve the problem of opening it and the buttons to be redesigned. And the last thing that I can think of, the third solution, and this is my moonshot idea, by the way, don't tell that to the interviewer. I'm just giving you guys the prompt that this is going to be the moonshot idea. What if the oven can actually, once you put things inside, to address the safety issue, what if it actually, detects when the food is ready and has a compartment that it, through maybe some mechanical way to move the food from the inside to the outside, it just pops out the food, and so that you don't need to actually open the oven anymore. And that way, the kids don't have to also open it or put their hands in or whatever. The food just, pops up into your kitchen counter. Before I move on, what is the problem with my moonshot idea? Anyone?
Feel free to type down in the chat, what do you think might be a problem with the moonshot idea that Diego just presented?
And I don't see the chat, by the way. So you guys have to tell me what is going on in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Oh my God, the chat just blew up. Okay. So first one, somebody said the meal might be too hot. It might have space constraint, requires a lot of R&D. It might be an impractical idea, needs a lot of hardware change for the oven, might require more space. Where will the food go? Food can spill out, hot food can spill to the person. So that's the overall sense that our
Okay.
attendees are having.
So that's not the problem with my moonshot idea. The problem with my moonshot idea is that what pain point am I solving? I'm talking about food being ready. I'm talking about serving the food automatically. But when did I mention that that was a pain point? Probably never. So be careful with that. That's also a very, very common mistake is people tend to, or candidates tend to spit out ideas, even if it's moonshot or not, that don't end up solving the pain points. As a PM, focus on these are your pain points. And even if your idea sounds incredibly cool, focus that on the solution to the pain point, not on the cool idea. So anyway, going back to the interview. All right, so those are my 3 features that I propose. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is it okay if we go into how we would prioritize these features? I can think of a few things, but before I go there, do you have any questions, anything else that you'd like to add to the solutions?
Mm-hmm. So one remark I have is I really like the way you thought of like a physical component of this space, because often I see like PMs who might be interviewing might only be thinking about the technology aspect, but I think it's important to take into consideration a mechanical aspect as well, especially when you're designing physical products. So that is a note I would make. And in terms of next steps, this sounds good. So, let's dive into how would you prioritize this, and if implemented, measure the success of your features for the idea you prioritized.
Yeah, absolutely. So here, before I go into the solution, when it comes to prioritize, there are many frameworks you can use. There are frameworks about like technology, feasibility, cost, R&D. My only suggestion here is whatever framework you use, think back to the goal. Like, what is our goal? And if your prioritization addresses the goal and at the same time addresses the pain points, then go with that. But don't forget to address the goal that you started with. So prioritization and metrics. Okay, so Darsh, thinking of the pain points that we have, I would say the biggest thing should be the physical redesign of the oven and making sure that the controls are reachable. Um, and actually, this probably some of the solutions that I mentioned can cover multiple pain points. And so I believe that if we redesign the hardware, or in this case, the oven, right from the start and making sure that the door opens automatically up and down, and if we move the buttons all the way to the front, if that's our first solution, we can actually include one more feature to that, which is adding an internet connection. And the reason why I say that is because once we have the hardware locked, it'll be easier to then update any other software feature that we want, versus if we ask our users to first buy something that is more software driven, and then we ask them to change the type of oven. I mean, I don't know how often people change their oven, but I can imagine that I'm going to change mine, in 6 years, 7 years. I cannot think of a timeline. So I believe that whatever change we do today should be focused on the hardware. So first, I would decide to prioritize changing how it looks. In other words, opening the doors up and down, putting the buttons up front, and making sure that the oven is also connected to internet. The second priority will be around the safety feature, which is now that we have internet connection that we can do updates, then it's about the oven should only be open when parents have their Bluetooth or enable or their phone Bluetooth enabled nearby. That way we can give them that peace of mind that even if it's really easy to open the oven, they can still, very, very, easily protect their family. The oven won't open unless they are nearby. And for the third option that I mentioned about the food detection, I would just prioritize that third because I really think it's a really nice to have, but not something that we need today to make this adoption faster. I don't think it's while I think it's a really cool element to have, it not only involves a lot of research and development, but also it means that we're not really addressing the pain points right out of the bat. Now, let me make a pause here. I am trying to fix what I said about this moonshot idea of not solving the problem and why it will go third. But in reality, you should never do that, meaning you should never give a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. Like, make sure your 3 solutions or your 5 solutions always address the pain points. Right now, I'm just trying to fix the screw up that I did with that moonshot idea. Mm-hmm. And sorry, go ahead.
So before we move ahead, I really like the way that you could think about the vision of the product. So one thing to note here is Diego not only mentioned a solution that can be done right now, but he also mentioned something that can be done in the future. So I personally think that gives you a quality that you're able to think of your products ahead of time. So Diego, my question to you would be, if you would have to summarize like your solution in one sentence before we go ahead, like, I'm trying to build this to solve this user problem, how would you encapsulate that into one sentence, which can be termed as, let's say, product vision?
Right. So in our case here, we're trying to build an oven that is very accessible and safe for users in a wheelchair, that is going to address some of the main pain points around space and mobility.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense. Let's continue towards how would we measure the success.
So now that we know how we would implement and what's the order of implementation based on the criteria that I mentioned, let's measure success. And success can be different metrics. Like, for example, we could say, well, let's measure things on sales. Of course, that's going to be an important number, but let's also measure things like returns. What if people are returning much more than what we were expecting? We need to also measure things like customer calls or customer complaints. Like, what if these ovens are failing a lot? All of that is going to give us signals on how people are reacting to this market. But there are also other types of signals. Like, for example, depending on the channels where we're selling this oven, let's assume it's selling on an online retailer like Walmart or Amazon or any of these other, we can also capture things like, what is the rating? What are people saying about it? What are the comments? Are they positive? What's the sentiment? Social media, what are people saying around our branding, our marketing campaign? So all of that is going to give us an idea of how many people are talking about our product. Is the sentiment positive or negative? So based on that, on those types of signals, we can measure whether this has been a success or it's been successful. At a second tier, if we implement an oven with something like internet, we can also capture signals from the oven directly. Like, we can look at things like how many times the oven is being used, how many times people are using the Bluetooth functionality to unlock the oven door, how much time does the oven is turned on, and so on and so forth. And this is going to give you more metrics. Again, depending on the product, you will start hearing things about like monthly active users and total active users and daily active users and sessions. And depending on the product you're designing, it's a type of metrics that you're going to use. But in our case, for the oven, this is a second tier. This is going to give you more metrics about usage, more so than a metric to measure the success. Remember that our goal is about adoption, is about entering the market. So we want to know how much we're selling, how much people are talking about it, how much people are in a positive way talking about it versus in a negative way. Mm-hmm. Now, just before I give it back to Darsh, a lot of candidates stop here. Like, once they talk about the metrics, that's it. My recommendation is, before giving the control back to interviewer, is just quickly say, okay, that's how I would measure success. Now, one quick thing that I love to do, Darsh, is just to quickly summarize what we've done. But if you got any questions, or if you think we should go through, to another question, perhaps, let me know. And depending on the interviewer, sometimes they'll say, yes, do a quick summary, or no, let's go to another question.
Mm-hmm. So thanks, Diego, for that insight. And I really liked enjoying to hear your thought process behind the solution. And a lot of times, this is also something to keep in mind. It's more about the thought process rather than the actual solution you bring out. It's trying to understand whether you thought of things that a PM should think about. And I have one interesting question in the chat, who I think attendees would be interested to know about. Somebody mentioned that they're just a little confused on how to balance suggesting features that align with the addressing the pain point and also showcasing broad vision with moonshot ideas. So how do you balance these feature suggestion at the same time addressing it with the pain point?
So the biggest problem for many product managers or aspiring product managers is that they think of features as if they were the users. And that could not be further from the truth. As a product manager, you need to address your customer pain points. You need to make sure that whatever your users are suffering from or whatever their problem is, you address those. So even if you have this crazy great idea, if it's not addressing the pain point, then it's not a solution that you need to implement. Even if it's the most radically cool thing designed on paper, if it doesn't solve a problem, customers are not going to use it, right? So to get to that balance, you have to always think of when you are at the stage of these solutions or thinking of these features and the moonshot idea, keep two things in mind. What is your goal? Is your goal to enter the market? Is your goal to increase satisfaction? Like, what is your goal? And the second is, what are the pain points? And the 3, the 5, the 2, whatever number of pain points you chose, those are what's going to dictate what are going to be your solutions. Now, in your solutions, you can use as much crazy tech as you want. Like I could have said, we could do an oven with a VR headset so that parents can teach kids about how to cook without having to practice in the real oven, and therefore it will be safety, but yet it will actually make the parents comfortable that their kids will be using the, I don't know, whatever kind of crazy idea. So the amount of technology doesn't matter as long as you constantly think of what are the pain points that I'm addressing and what is the goal of our design. Hopefully I answered the question, Darsh.
Yep, that definitely does. And to our attendees, think of it as like before you start anything, why do you want to do it? Like PMs are supposed to be advocate of users. So if you're not solving something that is an actual pain point for user, you're not like addressing the problem. So always think about that you're growing from the core. Like product buds, we say buds are seeds. So always think about root of the problem. Like why are we doing it? And that should drive your solution. So Diego, with the interest of time, I want you to just give an overview of one more question and then we'll move to our Q&A. But feel free to just give like a high level overview of how would you do this. So if we had to price this oven, like we had to set up a price, what is the approach that you'd follow? Like it's okay if we don't go into details,
Right.
but if you just had to do an overview.
Yeah. So when you get a question like this, the interviewer is not asking for a specific number, or if they are, it's not about the cents are wrong or right. It's not about the number itself. It's about how you think about it. And here are a few things that you need to consider. Who are we? Okay, we are a startup. And the startup, as Darsh was mentioning, the startup specializes in AI, in cloud, in data, right? So here you can also think of something like Google. Google is about data, right? So when I talk about pricing, it's not about just spitting out a number. It's about thinking, okay, if I care about data, then how can I make business out of that data? And here's where you can start thinking of, well, first of all, our users are parents, so they're probably, we need to make ourselves a position. We are a startup. Who are we addressing? Are we addressing like, high value customers who are willing to pay thousands of dollars, or more middle tier where somebody's going to spend a couple hundred? And because we are a startup and it's our first product, we probably want to address that middle tier where they're going to spend, I don't know how much an oven costs, but let's say a typical oven is $600. We want to be in that range. Now, the second thing is going back to who we are, and we specialize in data. What if we actually make it cheaper? And since we are doing this, door for like very interactive visual screen, we actually make it sort of like an LED door where we can display stuff, and we advertise, or we created sort of a subscription business where people can subscribe for recipes, and we sell advertisement space for other cooking recipes or other kitchen equipment that people can buy, and sort of like making a new business out of just the oven. So you've got the one-time sell plus the subscription. The whole point of this is it's not about the number, it's how you think of who you are and what type of business are you in. I'm a startup, I'm about data, let's brainstorm ideas. And again, this is a moonshot idea. I mean, imagine if your oven was an LED that displays stuff in the door. Like, that's not common, and it doesn't have to be feasible today, but it's something that if it makes business sense and if there's it's a pain point, then there's a need for that in the market.
Mhm. Perfect. So everyone, we are recording this, so don't feel that oh, how do I keep track of it? You can go back to the YouTube recording and feel free to follow Diego on LinkedIn. And Diego also has his own YouTube channel where he talks about how you can create a PM resume or what exactly is PM. And yeah, we'll be moving to our Q&A, but before we do, just some heads up that we'll be skipping some questions if they are repetitive, or if we could direct you to a resource for that, just to have that interest of time for everybody who's attending. So moving on to the Q&A, I'll be sharing my screen for the Slido. And again, our Q&A is available on slido.com. Just enter the hashtag buds and you'll be able to see it. So moving forward, the first question we have is from Kajal, and that is how and what skills should be developed as a fresher to get into product management, and what size or companies would help me in getting an experience for the same?
So the types of skills, I mean, look at I would say the basic product management skills. I'm going to do a shameless plug in here to, I did a YouTube video on what is product management, where I talk about what are the different sets of skills that a product manager needs. And they are very common. You can actually read them, like just literally do a quick online search, what, product management skills. And you'll find things like working cross-functionally and influencing others and leading teams. And you'll realize very quickly that most of these are soft skills.
Mhm.
Why is that? Why not, technical skills? If you're applying to a very, very specific job, for example, cloud AI development, then yes, for sure, you're going to need cloud and AI experience. But in general, the other PM skills are going to be more soft skills. So the skills that you have to develop, if you're an engineer or even if you're not, is more around how can I lead a team? How can I prove that I influence others? How can I show that I can work cross-functionally? How can I show that I can deal with ambiguity? What sides of companies would help you in getting that experience? Well, it really, I would say anything. Like if your work is you're an individual contributor where you only do one thing, then try to find a side project or create a side project that helps you with those skills. If you're a student and all you do is just your, attend classes, do your project, do your work, and that's it, then create an opportunity, join a club, or just like Grace, Henrika, Darsh here, and the rest of the product bots, do a project like this. Do something that helps you to tell the story where you can say, hey, I led a team to create something. So don't feel that you need to join a company or you need to even pay a website to help you with those skills. You can create those skills yourself. Just create the opportunity.
Perfect. And I think that also loops in the question that Shreyanshi has, that what kind of skills you should develop. And just to like top of following Diego's point, Shreyanshi, it can be anything really that can help you justify through your experiences. If you can take something ambiguous and make structure to it, make something more disciplined out of it. And one way to do it, just go on any APM or PM into job application posting, and you'll see in there that what are they expecting or what do they want from the candidate. So try noting those points down and try to see if you have had experience doing that. And you, if not, as Diego suggested, just do some side projects and that should help with it. So moving on to our next question is, I think it's a good question. Somebody has asked that if everyone is using a similar framework in product sense interview, how do you stand out as a candidate?
So the framework is just going to guide you through the question. It's just going to help you guide through here are the different steps. But there's a big difference in saying, the first thing that I'm going to do is talk about users, then pain points, then solutions, then metrics, then blah, 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 and paint it as a framework, then making it a conversation and saying, hey, Darsh, so here's the type of users that I'm thinking about, and here's why I'm thinking about these users. I also need to consider other types of users, even if I'm not mentioning them because of these reasons. And once I identify a user, I can think of a few pain points for this particular user. So it's about how you tell the conversation. The framework is just going to guide you through it. How you tell the story is what's going to set you apart. And just to add one more thing there, the reason why I showed you a framework that you've probably have, like, it's not popular, you probably have not seen at least the shape, the form, the colors, the reason why it's quote unquote new, or at least different, is because you have to feel comfortable with the framework. I read a ton of different frameworks, and as I was practicing and doing mock interviews and doing real interviews, there were some parts here and there that were very awkward for me to say them. Like I was like, doesn't fit. Like I'm trying to fit the framework, everything in the framework into the interview. And a couple of friends, like, we felt the same. So we started to take parts here and there to create our own framework. And this is what we feel comfortable with when going through an interview. The point is, if you like this framework, go ahead and use it. And if you feel you need to add stuff, remove stuff, change things, go ahead and do it. You should always keep in mind that you're answering the question, going through the users, the pain points, the metrics, prioritization, so on and so forth. But you have to feel comfortable saying it. Otherwise, it's going to feel robotic and you're not going to feel natural. And it goes back to the question to the question that says, how do you stand out? The answer is you're not going to stand out if you don't feel comfortable going through all the steps and answering the question. So framework is just a guide on how to solve these problems, but listen to the question. That's my advice.
Exactly. And just to like follow up on that, it's like, ask yourself why you should get a job and not thousands of others, right? Like, what is different about you? And that same goes for frameworks, that it should have your different flavor. That what is unique in Diego that is not unique in others. So ask that question to yourself, and that might be helpful. And this also kind of answers our previous question. You can feel free to use Diego's framework and for your product sense interviews. So one more question is, where can I get internship to practice product management? I think Diego also answered this question. You can do side projects, or you can just try to showcase your experiences and relate those to product management. The next question is related to the case study we solved. Our goal was user adoption. If the goal was to increase revenue in selling ovens, would you brainstorm pain points based on the user or the overall goal?
So the solution or the pain points, the solution, or would you brainstorm pain points on the user? Okay, got it. So the pain points have to always be linked to the user. Like your pain point, I mean, your goal is about increasing revenue or increasing sales. Or I'm going to tell you one thing: Amazon was not profitable until a few years ago. So your goal may not be to be profitable, may not be to increase revenue. Your goal may be to increase user adoption. So keep the goal in mind. But the pain points are about the users. Like, if a user cannot use your product, you're never going to reach that goal. So the connection is, you got the users, you have their pain points, you solve those pain points, hoping that by doing that, the users can use your product, are satisfied with your product, and then you can reach your goal.
Mm-hmm. Sounds perfect. And our next question is, if you had to transition from an engineering background to product management, how would you craft a resume that helps showcase PM skills?
Another shameless plug in here. So I've got another video on crafting your PM resume where I detail like how to do that. But even before answering the question, I'm going to say, for those of you that are not engineers, you do not have to be an engineer to be a product manager. I'm a terrible example of that because I am an engineer, but you don't have to be, right? The product management is about bringing that business and customer side to the problem. Mm-hmm. Having the technical background is a great addition, but to answer the question now, if you're an engineer, you have to show all the non-technical skills on your resume. In other words, the what I mentioned earlier, the skills like leading teams, working cross-functionally, influencing others, dealing with ambiguity. You have to show that in your resume versus being it very specific into the technology that you used or the type of work that you did. Make sure that those soft skills are highlighted in your resume.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Diego. And so we are almost at time for our event. For the sake of the time, this would be our last question for the event. After this question, we'll be taking some Q&A. If you have time, feel free to stick around to ask some questions to Diego. But for this event, Diego, our last question is, should you have mentioned company mission or vision before going to segments?
I mean, when you think of mission or vision, it's really hard because in this case, if Darsh made up the example, for let's say he said, we're just a startup who works in cloud and AI. And Darsh, you completely made this up. And then I ask you, hey, what is our mission and our vision? As an interviewer, what would you say? Like you literally made it on the spot. What would you say if I ask you that question?
I would just say we don't have like a mission or vision. We are still kind of figuring out if this product is fit, and we just want to see like we can solve this problem for our users.
Right. And if Darsh was, for example, a Microsoft interviewer, then I should know the mission and the vision. But how's that going to help me in solving the problem, right? I mean, it's good that you know the mission and the vision for Microsoft or Google or Apple or whichever company you're interviewing with, but it doesn't really add to the segments. Keep that in mind, keep the goal, keep the company. If you're talking about Microsoft, it's about empowering others. If you're talking about Google, it's about data. If you're talking about Apple, it's about user experience. So keep those big buckets of characteristics of the company, but don't think that, oh, it's a must have, or I must know the mission and the vision for every company. It's good to know, but it's not gonna change drastically in any way.
Exactly. And to follow on Diego's point, that if you're getting interviewed, the company is more interested to know about your thought process, your uniqueness. They're not that much concerned whether you know their company well or not, because you can always learn after you're onboarded. But do you have that unique thought process that a PM requires? I would say that is the main thing that they are trying to look for. And for all the questions that are pending, feel free to send Diego a message on Product with Slack and be respectful for his time, because as we know, he's working, he's also studying, and he's also giving advice to so many other aspiring PMs. So you can feel free to ping him there, and I'll be stopping the share for my screen. And Diego, that was a great interview. Thanks for kind of walking us through the process. And I think overall our attendees had a good time, because a lot of times we are on the other end, like we are the interviewers, so we don't really get the chance to kind of see that, oh, how might a seasoned PM answer it. So thanks for taking that time out. And do you have any thoughts of our event or a message for PB members?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you guys for inviting me. I think this was a really, really great experience. I had a lot of fun. The first thing that I'll say is that hopefully you guys saw today, I try to combine the framework, the things that I was thinking about as I was answering, with how I would try to answer the question in a real interview. Of course, given the time constraint, I cannot elaborate, I cannot go deep into my answers. But the goal today was to give you an idea of what you should think about and how you should try to answer the question. So when you're in an interview, those 45 minutes that I had today are probably going to go deep into the answer. So I'm sure there are many ways to improve my answer. Don't just stay on the surface like I did. Try to go deeper. But I hope I gave you that idea. Now, the last thing that I want to say is that getting into product management is a marathon. Getting into product management is not a one-day thing. Your next job may not be in product management. If it is, that's awesome. In my case, it was after my MBA. And in the case of many friends, it was not after their MBA. It was after their second job of, post MBA. Being in product management is a marathon. So keep your hopes high, work hard to get it. And the most important thing that even was mentioned at the beginning was that networking is not just about sending a message randomly every couple months. It's about building that relationship. Many of the jobs that I know that many of my friends have was thanks to the advice of other friends with whom they network. So look at this community of product bots and reach out to each other, practice with each other. You guys are not competition. You guys may be applying for the same job, but the fact that one of you gets it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It just means now you have a PM contact in the company that you want to work for. And that PM is going to help refer you guys and put a good word for you if you guys know each other and are friends. But if you're just a random stranger who suddenly messages, it's not going to be that easy. So network, it's a marathon, and continue working hard for it. That's my parting advice for this group.
Thank you so much, Diego. And I think that is a great point, because all of us are kind of, Product Buds was made with the thought that we are a community. You have a support group to reach out to when you are facing problems, or even maybe just curious, or, oh, I found this new product. So keep utilizing it. We love to hear from all of you. And if you like this workshop, feel free to post on LinkedIn, tag Diego, tag Product Buds. And if you want, we'll also interact with your posts, because we understand as students or aspiring, it's difficult to build your brand on LinkedIn. So we are here to help you. Feel free to do that. And I'll be stopping the recording for now. And we are like officially over time also. So if you have anything else to do, or have something else planned, feel free to leave the call. And Diego here would be just for a few minutes answering any other outlying questions. Thank you so much. So with